The police car's lights were still flashing through my living room window when I realized I couldn't remember how to breathe properly. My son was holding his wife's arm, not gently, and she was crying those big theatrical tears that had fooled me for so long. The pawn slip was still in my hand, crumpled now, the paper soft from my grip. 3 months earlier, I had handed her a velvet box with a smile on my face, believing I was building a family. I was wrong. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much, but my story might save you from making the same mistakes I did. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Phoenix, where the heat makes everything shimmer like a mirage, and sometimes you can't tell what's real and what's just your mind playing tricks on you. I'm 68 years old, and I worked as a secretary for 32 years before my knees gave out and forced me into early retirement. My pension is small, the kind that makes you count pennies at the grocery store and buy the generic brand, even when you're craving the name brand. But I had savings, a little nest egg I'd been building since my husband died 12 years ago. That money was supposed to be my security blanket. My husband Tom and I had been married for 36 years when the heart attack took him. 1 minute, he was laughing at something on the television. The next, he was clutching his chest and falling forward. I rode in the ambulance holding his hand, watching the paramedics work on him with this detached feeling, like I was watching it happen to someone else. He was gone before we reached the hospital. After the funeral, after the casseroles from neighbors stopped coming, after everyone went back to their normal lives, I was left with a silence so profound, it felt like drowning. Michael was all I had left, and I clung to that relationship like it was a life raft in the middle of an endless ocean. My son Michael got married 2 years ago to a woman named Ashley. She was pretty in that polished way, always had her nails done and her hair highlighted, the kind of woman who knows how to smile at exactly the right moment. I wanted to like her. No, I needed to like her, because Michael looked at her like she'd hung the moon. And isn't that what every mother wants? To see her son happy. So when they got married in a small ceremony at a courthouse, I didn't complain that I hadn't been consulted about the venue or the guest list. I just showed up with a casserole and a check for $500, which was more than I could afford, but felt right. Looking back now, I can see the red flags from their courtship. They'd only known each other for 6 months before getting engaged. Michael had introduced us at a barbecue, and Ashley had been charming, asking me questions about my life, complimenting my potato salad, touching my arm at just the right moments to create intimacy. But there was something rehearsed about it, like she'd practiced these gestures in a mirror. When I mentioned it to Michael later, suggesting maybe they should take more time to get to know each other, he'd bristled. He said I was being judgmental, that I didn't want him to be happy, that Ashley had been hurt by her own family and needed acceptance from his. I backed down immediately. I didn't want to be the overbearing mother-in-law, the stereotype that ruins marriages, so I swallowed my concerns and pasted on a smile. The necklace came later. It was their first anniversary, and Ashley mentioned in passing that she'd always wanted a piece of real jewelry, something she could pass down someday. She said it while we were having coffee in my kitchen, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, and there was something in her voice that made me want to give her the world. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I just wanted to be needed. The decision to buy that necklace didn't happen overnight. I spent 3 weeks thinking about it, lying awake at night doing calculations in my head. $2,000 was 6 months of pension checks. It meant eating cheaper meals, skipping my medications for a while, maybe not running the air conditioning as much during the hottest months. But every time I wavered, I thought about Ashley's face when she'd mentioned wanting real jewelry. I thought about the grandchildren they might have someday, and how that necklace could become a family heirloom. I thought about finally feeling like I belonged to something again. I went to the jewelry store on Camelback Road, the one with the fancy window displays that I'd walked past 1,000 times without ever going inside. The air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice when I opened the door, and suddenly I felt self-conscious about my discount store dress and worn shoes. A young salesman approached, probably seeing an easy mark in this old woman who clearly didn't belong in such a fancy place. But I held my head high and told him exactly what I wanted. He showed me several pieces, laying them out on black velvet with practiced efficiency. The necklace that caught my eye had 3 sapphires set in gold, each stone catching the light and throwing it back in shades of deep blue. It reminded me of the night sky, of something eternal and precious. The salesman talked about the craftsmanship, the quality of the stones, the 14-karat gold. I barely heard him. I was already imagining Ashley's reaction, the way Michael would look at me with gratitude and respect. When the salesman told me the price, my stomach dropped. $2,300, even more than I'd budgeted for in my head. I should have walked away. I should have chosen something more modest, something within my means. But instead, I heard myself asking if they had a payment plan. The salesman's smile widened. Of course they did. I could put $500 down and pay the rest over 6 months. The interest would add another $200 to the total. But what was $200 more at that point? I was already diving off the cliff. Might as well enjoy the fall. I signed the papers in a daze, my hand cramping around the pen. With each signature, I was committing to eating store-brand crackers for dinner, to keeping my thermostat at 85 in the summer, to skipping my book club lunches because I couldn't afford the $12 entree. But I was also buying love, or so I thought. I was purchasing a place in their family, securing my future as the beloved mother-in-law who'd made such a generous sacrifice. What a fool I was. She cried when I gave it to her. Right there in my living room, she threw her arms around my neck and called me the most generous person she'd ever met. Michael stood behind her, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. I felt like I'd bought my way into their inner circle, like I'd secured my place in their lives forever. How stupid I was. Ashley held the necklace up to the light, and the sapphires sparkled like stars. She put it on immediately, rushing to the mirror in my hallway to admire herself. "I'll treasure this forever," she said, meeting my eyes in the reflection. "I'll never take it off. It'll be my most prized possession." Michael hugged me then, whispered "thank you" in my ear, and I felt tears prick my own eyes. This was worth it, I told myself. This feeling right here, this moment of pure connection, was worth every penny. The first crack appeared about 3 weeks later when I stopped by their apartment unannounced. I know. Mothers-in-law aren't supposed to just drop in, but I'd made too much pot roast and thought they might want some. Ashley answered the door in her bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon, and there was something off about her expression, like I'd interrupted something private. She took the pot roast with a tight smile and didn't invite me inside. When I asked if I could use the bathroom, she hesitated just long enough for me to notice. The apartment looked different somehow, emptier, but I couldn't put my finger on what was missing. She hurried me out after 5 minutes, saying she had a headache and needed to lie down. I noticed she wasn't wearing the necklace. When I mentioned it, trying to keep my voice casual, she touched her bare throat and said, "Oh, it's in my jewelry box. I don't want to risk damaging it by wearing it every day." It made sense, I suppose. You don't wear your most precious jewelry to lounge around the house. But something about her tone, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine, made my stomach tighten with unease. I told myself I was being paranoid. Women get headaches. People have bad days. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on her face, the way her eyes had darted around the room like she was calculating something. I started paying more attention after that, watching for signs I couldn't name yet, but could feel in my bones. Have you ever had that experience, where your gut knows something before your brain catches up? That's where I was living, in that uncomfortable space between suspicion and denial. Over the next few weeks, I noticed other things. When I called in the evenings, Ashley would sometimes sound distracted, like she was doing something else while talking to me. Plans would get canceled at the last minute, always with reasonable excuses. She wasn't feeling well. Michael had to work late. They'd forgotten about another commitment. Each excuse made sense on its own, but together they formed a pattern of avoidance that I couldn't ignore. Still, I made excuses for them. Young couples need their space. They're building their own life together. Stop being so needy. The thing about blind belief is that it's comfortable. It's easier to make excuses than to face the possibility that you've been played for a fool. So when I noticed Ashley wasn't wearing the necklace anymore, I accepted her explanation that she was keeping it safe in her jewelry box. When I offered to help them with grocery money, and she took it without any visible guilt, I told myself I was being a good mother-in-law. When Michael started making excuses about why they couldn't come for Sunday dinners anymore, I blamed his work schedule instead of considering the alternative. I started keeping track of the money I was giving them, not in a resentful way at first, just in a practical one. I had a small notebook where I recorded my expenses, and I added a column for Michael and Ashley. $50 for groceries here, $100 for their car insurance there, $200 when their rent was short. Within 3 months, I'd given them over $1,500 on top of the necklace. I was paying for their life while cutting corners in my own. My friend Margaret from church noticed I'd lost weight. She pulled me aside after service one Sunday and asked if I was okay, if I was eating enough. I lied and said I was trying a new diet, but the truth was I was hungry most of the time. I'd given so much money to Michael and Ashley that my own grocery budget had shrunk to almost nothing. I was living on rice and beans, on clearance bread and bruised fruit from the discount bin. My body was consuming itself while I poured my resources into a relationship that was consuming me. I'd given up a lot in my life. After my husband died, I could have gone back to school, could have tried for a better job, could have traveled like I'd always dreamed. But I chose to stay close to Michael, to be available whenever he needed me. I babysat his friends' kids for free. I loaned him money when his car broke down. I helped him move 3 times without complaint. I thought that's what mothers did. I thought sacrifice equaled love, and love equaled loyalty. But here's what nobody tells you about sacrifice. It only matters if the other person recognizes what you've given up. If they don't, then you're just losing pieces of yourself for nothing. I once read that hospitalizations from abuse cost $5.3 billion per year. When I came across that statistic online one sleepless night, it hit me like a physical blow. Because even though nobody had raised a hand to me, I was being abused. The emotional manipulation, the taking advantage of my generosity, the slow erosion of my dignity, all of that was a form of violence. And I was paying for it. Not just in dollars, but in my health, my peace of mind, my sense of self-worth. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning in July, when Phoenix was so hot that the asphalt bubbled and the air felt like breathing through a wet blanket. Michael had asked me to clean out his car because he was working double shifts and didn't have time. I should have said no. I should have told him to handle his own responsibilities. But old habits die hard, and I found myself in his driveway at 7 in the morning, armed with garbage bags and cleaning supplies. The car was a mess, fast food wrappers everywhere, empty soda bottles rolling around the floor, a thin layer of dust coating the dashboard. I worked methodically, filling bag after bag with trash, wondering how they lived like this. When I opened the glove compartment to check for anything important, I found it stuffed with papers, insurance documents, registration, receipts, random scraps with phone numbers scrawled on them. I almost missed it. The pawn slip was wedged between the insurance papers and the owner's manual, just a small piece of yellow paper that could have easily been mistaken for another receipt. But something about the header caught my eye. Desert Gold Pawn Shop, Indian School Road. My hands started shaking before my brain even processed what I was looking at. I pulled the slip out carefully, like it might explode if I handled it too roughly. The description was typed in faded ink. 14K gold necklace with 3 sapphire stones. The amount paid was listed below, $800. The date was from 2 months ago, less than 4 weeks after I'd given Ashley the necklace as a gift. I found it in the glove compartment, tucked between the insurance papers and a handful of fast food receipts. A pawn slip from a shop on Indian School Road. The description was clear. Gold necklace with sapphires, and the amount was pathetic, $800. Not even half what I'd paid. The date on the slip was from 2 months ago, which meant Ashley had pawned it almost immediately after I'd given it to her, and she'd been lying to my face ever since. I sat in that hot car for what must have been 20 minutes, just staring at the slip. The sun was beating down through the windshield, and sweat was running down my back, soaking through my shirt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. The numbers and words started to blur as tears filled my eyes. $800. She'd sold my sacrifice, my love, my desperate attempt to belong for $800. And then she'd looked me in the eye, week after week, and lied about where it was. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up, and all that came out was this awful wheezing sound. I thought about confronting her right then, marching into their apartment and demanding an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe it was the last shred of hope that there was some reasonable explanation I hadn't considered. So I took the slip, folded it carefully, and put it in my purse. The drive home is a blur in my memory. I don't know how I made it back without causing an accident. My vision was swimming, my hands were numb on the steering wheel, and I kept having to pull over because I was crying too hard to see the road. At one point, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and just sat there for an hour, watching people go in and out with their shopping carts, living their normal lives while mine was crumbling. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in my bed, watching the ceiling fan spin in lazy circles, and tried to understand how I'd gotten here. When had I become the kind of person who could be so easily discarded? When had my love become something that could be measured in pawn shop dollars? I thought about all the times I'd defended Ashley to my friends who'd expressed doubts, all the times I'd told Michael how lucky he was to have found her, all the times I'd pushed down my own instincts in favor of keeping the peace. I'd betrayed myself more than she'd betrayed me. Around 3 a.m, I got up and made myself tea. My hands were steadier now, but there was a hollow feeling in my chest, like someone had scooped out my insides and left only a shell. I sat at my kitchen table, the pawn slip laid out in front of me, and forced myself to think clearly. What did I know for certain? Ashley had pawned the necklace within weeks of receiving it. She'd been lying about keeping it safe. She'd accepted my subsequent gifts of money without any apparent guilt. She'd been avoiding me, canceling plans, keeping me at arm's length. What did that tell me about her character? What did it tell me about my son? Who must have known what she'd done? The Michael I'd raised wouldn't have been okay with this, but maybe I didn't know the man he'd become. Maybe marriage had changed him, or maybe I'd never really known him at all. That thought was more painful than Ashley's betrayal. At least with her, I could maintain the fiction that I'd been deceived by a skilled manipulator. But if Michael had known, if he'd been complicit in this, then I'd failed as a mother in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. The collapse came slowly, then all at once. I'd always been a person who reached out, who maintained connections, who checked in on people. Every evening around 7, I'd call Ashley just to chat, to hear about her day, to share a recipe or a funny story I'd heard. It was my ritual, my way of staying connected to Michael's life now that he was married and living separately. But after finding the pawn slip, I couldn't do it anymore. The first night, I picked up the phone and then set it down again. The second night, I didn't even try. By the end of the week, the silence had become its own presence, filling up the rooms of my house like a heavy fog. Ashley noticed. She started texting me, casual little messages, asking if I was okay, saying she missed our talks. The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick. She wanted to keep me on the hook, keep me believing that our relationship mattered to her, all while she was probably pawning something else I'd given her. I responded with short, polite texts that said nothing real. I'm fine, Just busy. Talk soon. Take care. I stopped the thing I'd done every day for years, and in stopping it, I found a small measure of power. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My body started failing in small ways. I developed a persistent headache that wouldn't respond to medication. My digestion went haywire, and I could barely eat without feeling nauseous. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with heart palpitations, convinced I was having a heart attack like Tom did. My doctor ran tests and found nothing physically wrong, which somehow made it worse. If there was nothing medically wrong with me, then I was just weak. I was just letting this situation destroy me from the inside out. My neighbor Rita saved me, though she didn't know it at the time. Rita is one of those wonderful busybody types who knows everyone's business and isn't afraid to say what she thinks. She'd noticed I wasn't myself, that I'd stopped tending my little garden and wasn't sitting on the porch in the evenings anymore. She started inviting me to community events, little things at the local senior center. And I went, because being alone with my thoughts was becoming unbearable. It was at a craft fair that Rita casually mentioned seeing Ashley at the pawn shop on Indian School Road. She said it like it was no big deal, just an observation, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She knew something was wrong, even if she didn't know what. That conversation, happening in the middle of a crowded tent full of handmade quilts and pottery, was the moment everything became real. It wasn't just my suspicion anymore. Someone else had seen it. Someone else could confirm that I wasn't crazy. "When was this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Rita thought for a moment. "Maybe 3 weeks ago? I was surprised to see her there. Pawn shops aren't really her style, you know. All that designer clothing she wears." There was an edge to Rita's voice, a judgment I'd missed before because I'd been so busy defending Ashley. "Did she see you?" "I don't think so. She was at the counter, talking to the clerk. She looked, I don't know, furtive, I guess, like she didn't want to be seen." Rita paused, then put her hand on my arm. "Honey, is everything okay? You haven't seemed like yourself lately." I almost told her everything right then, but the words stuck in my throat, weighed down by shame and embarrassment. Instead, I mumbled something about being tired and changed the subject. But Rita's confirmation had given me something important. Validation. My suspicions weren't paranoia. Ashley was still going to that pawn shop, which meant she was still selling things, still lying, still using me. Studies indicate that even after 1 year, mortality is still nearly 2 times higher for those who suffer from emotional abuse. When Rita sent me that article a few days later, highlighting that exact sentence, I understood what she was trying to tell me. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about my survival. The stress of the betrayal, the constant anxiety, the self-doubt, all of it was literally killing me. My blood pressure had been creeping up, my sleep was non-existent, and I'd lost 15 pounds without trying. I was wasting away. And for what? For the privilege of being used by someone who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse? I decided to set a trap. I know that sounds calculating, maybe even cruel, but I needed proof that I could show Michael, proof that couldn't be explained away or rationalized. I had a folder of documents in my desk, old insurance papers and property deeds that looked important, but were really just copies of things I'd already filed away. I left them on my kitchen table during one of Ashley's rare visits to my house, making sure they were visible but not obvious, like I'd just been sorting through paperwork and forgotten to put them away. Before she arrived, I marked each document with a tiny pencil dot in the bottom right corner, so small you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. I also took photographs of the documents on the table, making sure the timestamp was visible. I felt like a detective setting up a sting operation, and part of me hated that it had come to this. But I was done being naive. I was done making excuses. If Ashley was who I suspected she was, she'd take the bait. She took the bait. 2 days later, when I went to look for those documents, they were gone. I'd marked them with a tiny pencil dot in the corner, so small you'd never notice unless you were looking for it, and now they were just gone. Ashley had been in my house, had smiled and chatted and eaten the cookies I'd baked. And then she'd stolen from me again. The confirmation should have made me feel vindicated, but instead, I just felt tired. Tired of being treated like I didn't matter. Tired of watching someone I'd tried to love take advantage of me over and over again. But the exhaustion was also clarifying. I knew what I had to do now. I called Michael and told him I needed to talk to both of them, that it was important, that it couldn't wait. I could hear the confusion in his voice, maybe even a little fear, but he agreed. We set a date for Saturday afternoon at their apartment, their territory, the place where they felt safe and in control. I wanted them off balance, wanted to see their faces when I laid out everything I'd discovered. The days leading up to that confrontation were strange. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in months, like I'd finally stopped fighting against the current and had just let myself float. I gathered my evidence. The pawn slip, photos I'd taken of the missing documents on my table, and then of the empty space where they'd been. A record of all the money I'd given them over the past 2 years that they'd never paid back. I organized everything in a folder, labeled and dated, treating it like I was building a case for trial. Because in a way, I was. I practiced what I'd say, standing in front of my bathroom mirror and watching myself speak. I wanted to be calm, factual, unemotional. I didn't want to give them any ammunition to dismiss me as a hysterical old woman. I rehearsed my opening lines. I found something in Michael's car that we need to discuss. Simple, direct, no room for deflection. I also made a decision about what I wanted from this confrontation. Did I want an apology, repayment? For Michael to leave Ashley. I realized I wanted something simpler and more profound. I wanted them to acknowledge what they'd done. I wanted them to stop pretending, to stop gaslighting me, to admit that they'd used me and lied to me. I wanted the truth, spoken out loud, so I could stop questioning my own perception of reality. Saturday came with one of those perfect Phoenix mornings where the heat hasn't kicked in yet and the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I drove to their apartment with my folder on the passenger seat and I wasn't shaking anymore. My hands were steady on the wheel. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but I also knew that once I started talking, the words would come on their own. Anger has a way of finding its own language. They were waiting for me in their living room, sitting on the couch like parents about to discipline a child. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael looked worried, but Ashley had this expression on her face that I can only describe as smug. She thought she knew why I was there, thought she could talk her way out of whatever I was about to say. She had no idea. I sat in the chair across from them and placed the folder on the coffee table between us. The room was cold from the air conditioning, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. Or maybe that was just adrenaline. I started with the necklace, pulled out the pawn slip, and watched Ashley's face drain of color. Michael looked confused, glancing between the slip and his wife like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "I found this in your car, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "When you asked me to clean it out, can you explain to me why there's a pawn slip for the necklace I gave Ashley?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ashley opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a fish, gasping for air. Michael picked up the pawn slip, read it carefully, and then turned to his wife with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, confusion mixed with dawning horror. She tried to explain. "There was an emergency," she said. "They'd needed the money for rent. She was going to tell me, but the right moment never came." The lies tumbled out of her mouth so easily, and I could see Michael starting to nod, starting to accept her version of events. That's when I pulled out the bank statements, the record of every check I'd written them, every cash handout, every grocery run I'd paid for. I'd been giving them money constantly, so there was no emergency that couldn't have been solved without pawning my gift. "Here," I said, spreading the statements across the coffee table. $1,500 in 3 months, on top of the necklace. So tell me, Ashley, what emergency could possibly have required you to pawn something that meant so much to me when I was already giving you everything I had? Her story started to crumble. She claimed the money I'd given them had gone to other things, but she couldn't specify what. She said they'd been embarrassed to ask for more, but that didn't explain why she'd told me the necklace was safely stored in her jewelry box. She said she'd planned to buy it back, but the pawn slip showed no record of any payments toward redemption. With each question I asked, each piece of evidence I presented, her excuses became more desperate and less coherent. Then came the documents. I showed Michael the photos, explained how I'd marked them, how they'd disappeared during Ashley's last visit. She tried to deny it, said I must have misplaced them, but her voice was shaking now. Michael was looking at her differently, like he was seeing a stranger, and I knew I had him. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, spread out on the coffee table like a crime scene. "Why would you take my insurance papers?" I asked Ashley directly. "What were you planning to do with them? Steal my identity? Take out loans in my name? Help me understand what level of betrayal we're talking about here?" She couldn't answer. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face. But I felt nothing. No sympathy. No secondhand embarrassment. Nothing. I'd cried all my tears already. I'd spent months doubting myself, questioning my perceptions, making excuses for her behavior. Now, finally, the truth was laid bare, and it was her turn to squirm. The confrontation wasn't loud, which somehow made it worse. There was no screaming, no dramatic gestures, just the slow, terrible realization settling over the room like dust. Michael asked Ashley if it was true, and she couldn't answer. Her silence was the loudest confession I'd ever heard. I told them both exactly what I thought, that I'd been used, that my generosity had been exploited, that my love had been treated like a commodity to be sold for parts. I told them that I was done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with pretending that we were a family when I was really just a bank they could withdraw from without consequence. "Michael," I said, turning to face my son directly, "did you know about the necklace?" He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long before saying no. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Maybe he hadn't been there when she pawned it, maybe he hadn't actively participated in the decision. But he'd known. He'd known and said nothing, had watched me continue to give them money and gifts while keeping this secret. In some ways, his betrayal cut deeper than Ashley's. She was someone I'd been trying to love. He was someone I'd loved since the moment I knew I was pregnant. Someone I'd sacrificed everything for. Someone I'd trusted with my whole heart. Ashley finally broke. She started crying, apologizing, saying she'd made mistakes, but she loved me, loved Michael, loved our family. But here's what I'd learned. Love isn't just a word you say when you're caught. Love is action, respect, consideration. Love is not pawning your mother-in-law's heartfelt gift 2 months after receiving it. Love is not stealing from someone who only ever wanted to be close to you. Her tears meant nothing to me anymore. I'd cried myself dry weeks ago. "I don't believe you," I said simply. "I don't believe anything you say anymore. You've proven yourself to be a liar and a thief, and I will not allow you to keep hurting me." Michael didn't defend her, which told me everything I needed to know. He just sat there, his head in his hands, and I could see the foundation of his marriage cracking beneath him. Part of me felt guilty for being the one to swing the hammer, but a larger part of me felt relief. The truth was out now. It couldn't be unsaid or taken back. Whatever happened next was their problem to solve. The justice came swiftly and completely. Michael, to his credit, couldn't forgive what Ashley had done. They tried counseling, I heard later from Rita, who heard it from someone else, but the trust was gone. How do you rebuild on a foundation of lies? The counselor apparently told them that Ashley needed to take full accountability for her actions, to understand the depth of hurt she'd caused, to make genuine amends. But Ashley couldn't do it. She kept making excuses, kept trying to minimize what she'd done, kept playing the victim. Within 3 months, they were separated. Within 6, divorced. Ashley lost more than just her marriage. Word spread in our community the way it always does in tight-knit neighborhoods. And suddenly, she was persona non grata. The friends who used to invite her to book clubs and dinner parties stopped calling. Her own family, embarrassed by her behavior, distanced themselves. She'd gambled on my silence and lost everything. I heard through the grapevine that she'd tried to get back into our community, showing up at church services and volunteer events with a contrite expression and carefully rehearsed apologies. But people in Phoenix have long memories, especially when it comes to someone who preys on elderly folks. The word had spread that she'd manipulated and stolen from her mother-in-law, and that kind of reputation sticks. I saw her once, about 4 months after the divorce, at the grocery store. She saw me too, and the look on her face was pure panic. She abandoned her cart and practically ran out of the store. I felt nothing watching her go. No satisfaction, no revenge, just a dull acknowledgement that some people never truly change. As for the money and the necklace, I never got them back. Michael tried to make it right, offered to pay me back in installments, but I refused. I didn't want his money. I wanted him to remember what had happened, to carry that weight, to understand the consequences of choosing the wrong person. The financial loss was painful, sure, but it was also educational. I learned exactly how much my peace of mind was worth, and it was more than $2,000. But here's the thing about justice. It doesn't always make you feel better. I thought I'd feel triumphant watching Ashley's world crumble. Thought I'd feel vindicated seeing her face the consequences of her actions. Instead, I just felt empty. Sad for Michael. Sad for the family I'd thought we were building. Sad for the version of myself who'd been so desperate for connection that she'd ignored every red flag waving in her face. Victory tastes different than you imagine it will. The months after the confrontation were strange. I had to rebuild my relationship with Michael from scratch, and it wasn't easy. He was angry at me for a while, angry that I'd exposed his wife's true nature, angry that I'd ruined his marriage. Never mind that Ashley had ruined it herself. I was just the messenger. But you know how people are with messengers. We had some hard conversations, the kind where you have to decide if you're going to be honest or comfortable, and you can't be both. I chose honesty. I told him that he'd been so focused on keeping Ashley happy that he'd forgotten about everyone else, including himself. I told him that love shouldn't require you to turn a blind eye to bad behavior. Slowly, painfully, we found our way back to each other. It helped that Michael started seeing a therapist, started unpacking why he'd been so willing to overlook the warning signs, why he'd defended Ashley even when the evidence of her betrayal was staring him in the face. He apologized to me, a real apology that acknowledged the hurt and didn't make excuses. He said he'd been so afraid of losing her that he'd been willing to sacrifice me, and he was sorry. That apology meant more than any repayment could have. In one of our therapy sessions together, which Michael had asked me to attend, he finally explained how Ashley had manipulated him too. She'd told him that I was being controlling, that I was trying to buy their love, that the necklace had come with strings attached. She'd convinced him that pawning it was an act of independence, a way of establishing boundaries with his overbearing mother. He'd believed her because he wanted to believe her, because admitting she was manipulative meant admitting he'd made a terrible mistake. Hearing this broke something open in me. I realized we'd both been victims of the same person, just in different ways. For me, healing took a different shape. I'd spent so long defining myself by my relationships, by how useful I could be to others, that I'd forgotten who I was underneath all that service. So I started looking inward, started asking myself what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed from me. I joined a meditation group at the community center, started spending quiet mornings just sitting with myself and my thoughts. It was uncomfortable at first, facing all the feelings I'd been pushing down for years, but it got easier. I also started going to church again, something I'd drifted away from after my husband died. I'd been angry at God for taking him, for leaving me alone. But now, I needed something bigger than myself to lean on. The pastor at my church, a kind woman named Reverend Martinez, helped me understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or condoning. It means releasing the poison of resentment so it doesn't continue to hurt you. I'm still working on that part. Forgiving Ashley feels impossible some days, but forgiving myself for being so blind, that's getting easier. Reverend Martinez gave me a book about boundaries in relationships, and it changed my perspective completely. The author talked about how many of us, especially women of my generation, were raised to believe that sacrifice is the highest form of love. We were taught to give until it hurts, to put everyone else first, to measure our worth by how much we could do for others. But the book explained that this isn't love. It's self-abandonment. Real love includes self-love. Real boundaries protect everyone involved, not just the person setting them. I've also gotten serious about protecting myself financially. I closed the joint account I'd had with Michael since he was 18, the one I'd kept open in case of emergencies. I met with a financial advisor, something I'd never thought I could afford, and learned about ways to protect my assets. I set up a trust, modest as it is, and made sure that my will was ironclad. No more giving money away without a clear understanding of where it was going and why. No more sacrificing my security for someone else's comfort. The financial advisor, a young woman named Jennifer, didn't judge me when I explained what had happened. She said she saw cases like mine all the time, elderly people who'd been financially exploited by family members. She helped me set up alerts on my bank accounts, taught me how to monitor my credit report, and gave me resources for reporting elder financial abuse. I'd never thought of myself as a victim of elder abuse before. I was only 68, still relatively young and capable. But Jennifer explained that financial exploitation is one of the most common forms of elder abuse, and it often comes from the people we trust most. The spiritual peace I've found isn't some dramatic transformation. I'm not suddenly enlightened or free from pain, but I've learned to sit with difficult emotions instead of running from them. I've learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. I've learned that self-respect is more valuable than being liked. These are small revelations, maybe, but they're mine, and they're enough. Looking back now, I can see the pattern so clearly. Ashley isolated me slowly, subtly, making me feel like I needed to earn my place in their lives. She'd cancel plans at the last minute, always with a good excuse. She'd tell Michael things I'd said, but twist them slightly, creating little wedges of misunderstanding between us. She'd accept my gifts with tears and gratitude, and then discard them the moment my back was turned. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I'd been the perfect target, lonely, generous, desperate to be needed. But I've also learned something important through all of this, something I want to share with you before I finish my story. The health impact of emotional abuse is real, documented, and severe. It's not just about feeling sad or hurt. It's about the physical toll that chronic stress takes on your body. When you're constantly anxious, constantly second-guessing yourself, constantly walking on eggshells around someone, your body goes into a state of perpetual emergency. Your cortisol levels spike, your blood pressure rises, your immune system weakens. You're literally being damaged from the inside out. I learned that emotional abuse can manifest as physical symptoms: headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain, insomnia. I had all of these and more during the months leading up to my discovery of the pawn slip. I'd been to doctors, tried medications, changed my diet, but nothing helped because I wasn't treating the real problem. The real problem was that I was being emotionally abused by someone I trusted, and my body was keeping score even when my mind was making excuses. The research is clear on this. Victims of emotional abuse show symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder at rates comparable to those who've experienced physical violence. They develop depression, anxiety, and complex trauma responses. They lose their sense of self-worth and often struggle with decision-making because they've been conditioned to doubt their own perceptions. This isn't being dramatic or oversensitive. This is what happens when someone systematically undermines your reality. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. If you're in a relationship, any kind of relationship, where you constantly feel confused, where you're always apologizing but don't know what you did wrong, where you're giving and giving but never receiving, where you feel like you're walking on eggshells. Pay attention to those feelings. They're not random. They're your body and mind trying to tell you something important. Trust your gut. I ignored mine for too long, and it cost me dearly. Watch for the warning signs. Isolation from friends and family, financial control or exploitation, gaslighting and reality distortion, blame shifting and false accusations, love bombing followed by devaluation. These are tactics that manipulators use, and they work because they're subtle. They creep up on you so slowly that you don't realize what's happening until you're in deep. By the time I recognized the pattern, I'd already lost $2,000 and a significant portion of my dignity. Also, understand that emotional abuse often goes hand in hand with financial abuse. If someone is constantly pressuring you for money, if they're making financial decisions without consulting you, if they're hiding purchases or accounts, if they're pawning gifts or stealing from you, these are massive red flags. Money is power, and abusers know this. They'll use financial control to keep you dependent, to keep you trapped, to keep you from having the resources to leave. One of the most important things I learned is the role that our own beliefs play in keeping us stuck. I believe that family should stick together no matter what. I believe that good mothers sacrifice for their children. I believe that if I just tried hard enough, I could make Ashley love me the way I loved her. These beliefs weren't wrong on their own, but they became weapons that were used against me. Any belief taken to an extreme can become dangerous, especially when someone else is manipulating it for their own gain. I also want to talk about shame, because shame is what keeps us silent. I was so ashamed of being fooled, so embarrassed that I'd been taken advantage of, that I didn't want to tell anyone what was happening. I thought people would judge me, would think I was stupid or weak. And you know what? Some people did judge me. Some people said I should have seen it coming, should have been more careful, should have known better. But those people aren't important. What's important is that I survived, that I got out, that I'm telling my story now, so maybe someone else won't have to go through what I went through. The path to recovery isn't linear. Some days I wake up angry all over again, replaying conversations in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said. Other days I feel grateful that I discovered the truth before I lost even more. Most days are somewhere in between. I'm learning to be patient with myself, to understand that healing takes time, that it's okay to have setbacks. Progress isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up one more time than you fall. I've also learned the importance of boundaries. For years, I had none. I'd answer Michael's calls at any hour. I'd drop everything to help them with whatever they needed. I'd lend money I couldn't afford to lose. I thought that's what love looked like. Complete availability, total self-sacrifice. But real love requires boundaries. It requires saying no sometimes, requires protecting your own needs and resources, requires expecting reciprocity. A relationship where only one person is giving and the other is only taking isn't a relationship. It's exploitation with a pretty name. Now I have rules for myself. I don't lend money I can't afford to lose. I don't make major financial decisions without sleeping on them first. I don't ignore my gut feelings in favor of keeping the peace. I don't sacrifice my well-being for someone else's comfort. These rules feel selfish sometimes, especially given how I was raised to always put others first. But they're necessary. They're how I protect myself from ending up in the same situation again. Michael and I are rebuilding trust, but it's different now. There's a guardedness on both sides that wasn't there before. He knows I won't overlook bad behavior anymore, and I know he's capable of choosing someone else over me when push comes to shove. We're honest about this. We talk about it in therapy, in our phone calls, in our occasional dinners together. The relationship we're building now is based on reality instead of fantasy, and while it's less comfortable, it's also more authentic. We're not pretending anymore. As for Ashley, I heard she moved to California, started over with a new job and a new boyfriend. Good for her, I guess. I hope she learned something from what happened, but I'm not counting on it. People like that, people who can manipulate and exploit without apparent guilt, they don't change unless they want to, and wanting to requires a level of self-awareness that she never demonstrated. But she's not my problem anymore. She's someone else's lesson to learn now. I still live in the same house, still have the same small pension, still count pennies at the grocery store. But I'm not the same person I was when this story started. I'm stronger now, more aware, more protective of myself. I know my worth, and it's not measured in what I can give to others. It's measured in how I treat myself, in the boundaries I maintain, in the life I'm rebuilding on my own terms. That knowledge is worth more than any necklace, any amount of money, any false sense of family unity. So thank you for staying with me until the end of this long, messy story. Thank you for listening, for not judging, for being here. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar, or if you're worried about someone you love, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Let's break the silence around emotional and financial abuse. Let's stop pretending that just because there are no bruises, there's no harm being done. I want to ask you directly, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them sooner, or would you have walked away entirely? Do you think the consequences Ashley faced were enough, or should she have faced legal action for theft? Tell me in the comments what you think. I read every single one, and your perspectives help me process my own experience. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly, stories about overcoming, about finding strength, about learning to protect yourself and rebuild your life. And check out the video I'm linking about recognizing manipulation tactics in family relationships, or the one about financial abuse warning signs. Both of these could save you from a world of hurt. Until the next story, take care of your heart, protect your peace, trust your instincts, and remember, you are worth more than how useful you are to other people. You are enough exactly as you are without giving a single thing away. Take care now.